Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. The topic of this conversation is the Principals Research Awards and Festival 2025. We are looking at, it's under the theme Research Innovation for Present and Future. We're speaking with none other than the Pro Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal of the UWI St. Augustine Campus, Professor Rosemarie Belle-Antoine. Welcome, Prof. How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
I am always very excited to have a conversation with you. But looking at research, I think research can mean different things to different people. I want to ask, though, how do we measure research, especially if we look at it impacting development in the space?
That's an excellent question. We measure research in the academic field generally by publications and by policy formation. And you might well say that the first publication is not so accessible to the general public because they're in highfalutin journals, and that's how we are promoted when we publish those. But what you may not know is a lot of our research goes into policy. So we sit, for example, surprisingly to some, we sit on over nearly 400 committees, government, regional, international. I recently had to check some of them when I was doing the salary negotiations to demonstrate the breadth and the relevance of universities' work. And it's a tremendous amount. I have people on select committees at the United Nations. I have them in 4 regional institutions. Almost nothing happens in Trinidad and Tobago unless somebody from UWI is asked to sit on the committee or to give comments. All of that comes also from research. And so we can measure, and of course we do lots of consultancy work. So those are some of the ways in which you can measure impact. Some of it is visible, some of it not so visible.
And there's an African saying that power is built with collaboration and silence. But at the same time, the age that we live in at this point in time is almost as though, what have you done for me lately? And I think sometimes the UWI can fall victim because familiarity is something that can breed contempt a little bit. So in terms of these practical examples of how UWI is impacting the national landscape and even further afield, I think it's very important for us to have conversations like these. And with that in mind, I know they said the third time is a charm. This is the third time, I believe, for the Principal Research Awards and Festival 2025. How have you seen it grow thus far from start to where we are now?
Yeah, well, but your first part, I've often said UWI is like a neglected wife. You love the wife, but you're treating her bad. I've said this often. It is true, there's a certain complacency, and sometimes we don't recognize that University of the West Indies is indeed a world-class institution. It's ranked among the 3 to 5% top in the world, and most universities don't even get to be ranked. To be ranked, you have to be in a certain class. I mean, that is also lost. And a good measure of that, and the reason why, is because of our research. Because not every university is a research institution. We certainly are, like in the region, we're probably the only one really with a research record going back decades. But for St. Augustine, when I became principal 3 years ago, time really flies, I realized that, we have not been publicizing our research or incentivizing our research. And most universities, top universities, do try to have at least an open day or something. So one of my main strategic objectives was to launch the Principals Research Awards and the Research Open Days, which has now been named Festival. That sounds a lot nicer. I think it was my director of research, Prof. Sarah Van Kunar, that we call him Prof. Sarah, that came up with the term festival. But so we open it up to the public and other stakeholders, and it has grown tremendously. We have over, almost 200 abstracts and so on, applications, and it's really been, it's one of the things that I'm really proud about, because I always felt that so much work, so much talent, so much brilliance is on my campus, but even amongst ourselves, we don't know about it, like within faculties. Or, sometimes even your neighbor, you might be in the same faculty and you don't even know what they're researching because it's a sort of a lonely business. So now we celebrate with each other and we celebrate with the public and with the government and with the other stakeholders, and people can see what we're doing. So it's become very competitive as well in terms of the awards. We've had lots of nominations, but I think my favorite part, if there's a favorite part, is actually walking around to see the actual work on the posters that we exhibit in the festival, and you learn so much as to what is happening on the campus. So a tremendous success. And let me just say a little plug to our director of research. There's a saying, nothing happens before it's time. And I was very blessed because when I decided to launch this, I started off with my program officers working on it, the research awards and festivals. And then I appointed a new director of grad studies and research. The previous ones were great, but we were focusing a lot on graduate programs. And I said to him, look, we need to do more of the research. And he has been really wonderful taking this forward. I can just sort of sit back and he does all that's necessary together with my office. So I think it's a combination of that mission and the right people doing the right things that have caused it to grow.
Prof, there's a great deal to speak about, but I wanted to read and spell for me and I realize how, I guess, spoiled I am. And this is by you saying that not all tertiary institutions would do research, and that sounds a bit weird to me. Elaborate on that a little bit, please.
Well, some people just teach. Some institutions just teach. Some tertiary institutions just teach. And as I said, good research has to be original, and it has to be recognized internationally. For example, to be a professor, we use the term professor loosely here because we become Americanized. But in our system, professor is the highest grade, the highest rank in the academic community. You only get to be a professor. Some people never get to be one. They might get to be senior lecturer for the most, if so far. But you only get to be a professor if your research is not only original, but distinguished and internationally acclaimed. So all of us who are professors have had to go through that by external assessors, by the way, not just ourselves. So it's that kind of assessment that goes on in terms of the kinds of research. We're talking about original research. If you recall Professor Chady some years ago, who was working on mosquitoes, I don't know if you're aware of that. For many years, we had a professor, Chady, who was a leader in the world in terms of his research on mosquitoes. Unfortunately, he passed fairly young, but his work up to this month, I got the statistics. And in the UWI, we have like the top 10. We are first among the UWI in terms of all the top 10 researchers, but these are top 7 to be more precise, that are ranked among the best in the world in their fields. So he's one practical example. He's still ranked, although he's deceased. His work is still, because nobody has done what he was doing on mosquitoes and mosquito prevention and understanding. So, and you're wondering, well, for the average person, I think the average person could appreciate that working on mosquitoes or researching in order to alleviate the pain and suffering that they cause us would be important. Last night on CNC3, I probably shouldn't call your competitor, but I saw a little interview, another one of my researchers, Professor Sa, and he will be in the festival, and he's also, we also have a UWI Scientist Speak series with CNC3, but he was talking about their research on cancer treatment, which is still in the, I would say, the early stages, because he's a mathematician working with other scientists, and they may have a cure or for certain forms of cancer. So he was talking about it. I have another researcher, Professor Adish Ramsabag, who's on you, Dean of Sciences actually, who has been working for a few years now, and he was awarded, I think, in my first research awards. His work is on a cure or resistance for, we have developed a resistance to antibiotics because we use too many antibiotics. So his work is centered on that. And, you know, if we had a big pharmaceutical company in the region, he would have already been snapped up because, you know, you need millions to develop. But what tends to happen is that our researchers or postdocs, because we don't have the monies put into research and development in the region, often they tend to go abroad, whether it be the Harvards or whatever, as a postdocs, and they snap them up. And unfortunately, we or the region may not get the credit. But we have work that is comparative. Sometimes we work with persons from Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, they talk, and so on. But I just gave you two little examples. We have work going on the sargassum. You know, the weed, we are making pesticides out of it, things like that. We have lots of work in agriculture, food crops, the potato biscuit. We have work on the black soldier fly. I'm just looking at some of the things. Of course, AI, lots of work happening. One of our top researchers is one of the people I mentioned who sits on a UN select committee, just 35 people in the world who sit on this committee, and he's among them. Prof. Mike, who is on similarly in UN committees. So, and we are the leader. Let me just say, we are the leader. The University of the West Indies, not just us. We are actually leading university in the world when it comes to research on climate change. So I've given you some brief examples, but I'm sure we'll talk about more as we go along.
And as we go along, I think we'll just let this moment breathe for 2 seconds. We take a short break and we return. We are speaking with Pro Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal, Professor Rosemarie Belle-Antoine. Stay with us. We return after this. Welcome back. We are speaking with Pro Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal, Professor Rosemarie Belle-Antoine. We are speaking specifically about the Principal's Research Awards and Festival 2025. And yes, festival does sound better than an open day. Open day, it sounds as though, all right, it's something that the students will be saying, okay, I wonder if there's something I can get food for, boy, to see what I can pass through. But, and the last time we spoke, you were excited about research being done, as you were this time. But I'm asking though, does the UWI drive the research, or does the UWI facilitate the research being done?
No, we drive the research. In fact, even from the PhD stage, in order to do a PhD, you have to come up with an original idea. As I said, we value original research. So the research comes from us. But what has always been our limitation in this part of the world, especially in terms of pharmaceuticals and things like that, but just generally, is that we don't have a culture in this region, unlike Singapore and these countries that were able, they put billions into research development. So, you know, we do the research, but sometimes when it comes to maybe commercialization and so, we don't have the resources to do that, and that needs private sector or government intervention. But in terms of pure research and valuable research, certainly we drive the research, we come up with the ideas. The best research is seeing that there's a need for something and nobody has thought of it. We have over 60-something patents. We have lots of patents when we far exceed any other campus, in fact. And of course, patent means it's original research. So we certainly drive the research.
I like how you just, yeah, man, well, it is what it is. People can have opinions, but the facts speak for themselves.
Come on.
But I'm also asking though, because you spoke of partnering with other tertiary institutions who may have bigger coffers to help drive some of that research or to do some of that work. But speak to me a little bit about partnership with private entities, please, in the sense that, okay, there's this need has been identified, this area of research has been say, okay, well, this is something worth following. How does that work in terms of having private interests as well as the UWI move in lockstep, even towards innovation? Because that's something I want to ask us as well, in terms of just moving past research to make sure that it is something that is living, it is breathing, it is functional, and we see its effects on a day-to-day basis.
So I think that's a weak area in the region, including in Trinidad. We could do so much more, and we are here. We want to do more, but it's those. Well, in terms of governments, governments hardly move forward if they do have an idea without university. That's a fact. But very often, governments in the region do not um, innovate in terms of research, or they don't say, okay, well, let's look 20 years and we want to get to this point, so let's start the research. They very often don't, unlike the Asian tigers, the Singapores and so, who did it that way and were successful. And hopefully they will. But what tends to happen, something becomes, let us say, a crisis, like flooding. Right now, my campus is involved in at least 2 projects, $1 million projects that we are providing the research and guidance to try to address flooding. I think one of them is funded by a Caribbean bank, CAF, it's with involvement from government and so forth. So that's a crisis sort of thing. So we do lots of research, but in terms of partnerships, I've always felt it would be best if the country and the private sector, because it should be tripartite. It should be the private sector, the government, and university working together. Could say, okay, we want to develop this, and in order to do it, we need the research to get us there, and we can all work together. But so far, we have not seen that kind of, I would say, deep focus and synergy. Let us say agriculture. We have the only faculty of agriculture in the region, and it's, of course, very distinguished, over 100 years old. University came from the Imperial College of Tropical Agriculture and so on. We are still doing all kinds of innovative works. Right now, for instance, with their food crops, innovations and technologies for yam varieties, breadfruit, other staples. Long ago, we invented the buffalipso, things like that. But we don't have a roadmap to say, okay, we want you to focus on new types of rice. Let us say they said to the university, hello, we want to become the top rice producer in the world, which let us say the government said they wanted to do that. Let the private sector come together. University will be part of it, and our scientists can sit and determine how do we get there. Our cultural scientists, the other scientists, and we can assist. So you do need that direction. As it is, it's a bit ad hoc. Individual researchers determine, let's look at this, let's look at that. We might present it to the private sector, we might present it to the government. It may take or not take. I have found that our private sector we tend to focus on retail. We have a lot of retailers. We do not have a culture of either innovation or entrepreneurship, or certainly not research. I mean, little bits of research. And we do have partnerships on small scales and so on with the leading ones. But again, we don't have that culture. Let us invest in research development. I really hope we can move towards that. That's the only way we're going to go far.
I have 2 questions in the 3.5 minutes that we have, Prof, in terms of sometimes we don't necessarily have the access to realize this is going on. And you said the public is invited, so give me information about that. And I also want to ask you the significance of having researchers in different departments. Some people might even go as far as saying different silos coming together and say, hey, you doing that? I can see how research on that will help the research that I'm doing. So speak to those 2 things. Thank you.
Well, let me start with the second one first, because that's actually one of the things that I wanted. I am very big on multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. I had initiated a couple years ago a climate studies master's, which is actually interdisciplinary. We have sport in there, we have science, we have agriculture. It's a fascinating degree, right? And that's because I really believe that's the way forward. I'm sort of into the Renaissance thinking, sort of. I think it's the best way, a more holistic approach. And yes, when you have exhibitions or research festivals and awards and people know what's happening, you can make links. And that is nationally and internationally. It's the same thing when we go to conferences. We can link up with other researchers across the world who are doing similar things. And that's how you form the bonds. That's how your research becomes even better. So that is certainly happening. Up to yesterday, one of our top researchers was saying to me that she actually did that recently. She's an economist when she saw the things in research, and she's making linkages. So that's certainly it. In terms of the accessibility generally, we have been doing a number of things. I believe the university should be in the community. I'm sure you know that about me. So I have always felt that we should not just be relevant, we should be accessible. So apart from research days, it's happening, we have the awards on the 26th, but the 27th and the 28th, we'll have the exhibitions, and so people could come and view them. But we've also done other things like taking university to Blanchisseuse and Moruga and various rural communities to show some of what we do. I actually remember the science department having some lovely chemistry experiments, all children being so fascinated and so on. And we have been doing the newspaper columns. An interesting story before we close, Yara International, a top company, multinational who works with Trinidad, came to my office to offer us investment and partnership when they read an article in our series in the media, UWI Scientists Speak, on soil. And they came to us and said, we want to work with you. They were so excited. So that is accessibility, getting the message out there. The Research Festival is part of that general mission of mine to make university more visible, more accessible. You have to know what we are doing. Oh, and we have an award that is for the public as well. Last year I created the HARE Award, the Hurricane and Earthquake Award, Disaster Prevention Award, we call it HARE. It was timely then, but even more timely this year with what's happening with Hurricane Melissa. Last year we had some school children won some special prizes, but anybody can enter that one, any kind of research linked to hurricane and disaster mitigation, earthquake and disaster mitigation. So that one is for the public, they can enter. So hopefully, yeah.
And with that, I encourage us all, to go onto the digital platforms, the earned as well as owned platforms of the UWI to see what is taking place. And Principal, Pro Vice Chancellor and Campus Principal, Prof. Rosemarie Belle-Antoine, we want to thank you so much for the time and just piquing the interest and people, hey, that happening? We have things. And on behalf of the entire TTT crew, this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. Thank you so much for joining us.